Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NIH SBIR STTR program introduction and overview. I'm Mike Peck with the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. We're joined today by Steve Flame, who is a senior special advisor and entrepreneur investor in residence with the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. Gautam Prakash, who is an intellectual property expert with the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. Todd Haim, who is the director of the National Institute of Aging Small Business Program, and Luis Gutierrez, who serves as an entrepreneur in residence for the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. Today, I'm going to go over a little bit about the program specifics, and then we're going to get into a discussion about ways to improve your chances of succeeding with getting an SBIR award, and then more broadly, how to succeed in this early translational space as far as intellectual property considerations, business considerations, and learn a little bit about both the Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute's priorities, but then also the National Institute of Aging priorities. So to get into it, I'm going to stop my video. All right, so the Small Business Innovation Research and the Small Business Technology Transfer Research programs, SBIR and STTR programs, are one of the largest sources of non-dilutive funding available from the government for biomedical research. At the NIH, we have over $1 billion of funding available to small businesses. And this provides seed funding for innovative technology development, and shown here in the diagram is where the SBIR STTR funding fits into the scheme of product development. So starting out with the basic research grants, this provides that nice bridge between the proof of concept and research development components to advance it toward projects that are more interested for angel investors and other types of investors. So the SBIR and STTR programs are unique as funding sources in that they provide non-dilutive capital for research and development. These programs provide grants, not loans, so no repayment is required. And with these programs, the IP is normally retained by the small business. And finally, SBIR funding can be used to leverage additional funding and collaborations. Generally, the SBIR and STTR programs are very similar in many ways, except for three critical differences. First, the SBIR program, the principal investigator must be greater than 50% employed with the small business. Second, while the SBIR program allows partnering, the STTR program requires partnering with a nonprofit research institution, and usually that is a university or academic institution. And finally, the STTR program has specific rules about where the proposed work is completed, with a minimum of 40% of the work being done by the small business and at least 30% by the research partner. In order to be eligible to apply for the SBIR and STTR programs, you must be an organized for-profit US business with fewer than 500 employees, and the proposed work must be done in the US. There are some exceptions made on a case-by-case basis for some work outside of the US. And the company also has to meet one of these ownership requirements. So down below, we're looking at 50% greater than US owned, independently operated, or controlled by one or other businesses, or for SBIR only, greater than 50% owned by multiple venture capital operating companies, hedge funds, or other type of investment firms. At the NIH, the SBIR and STTR funding is spread out across 23 participating institutes. The SBIR and STTR programs in each of these institutes and centers can vary in terms of overall budgets, resources, rules, and available funding opportunities. And we recommend that you contact program staff in order to understand the details of the opportunities available within institutes and centers that are relevant to your technology. And here we're circling in red the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, and not circled is National Institute of Aging, which you'll hear about in a little while. So there are several different programs to apply to based on how advanced your technology is, beginning at proof of concept with phase 1 awards all the way through to commercialization. Phase 1 awards, we're looking at to fund feasibility and proof of concept studies, while phase 2 awards fund full R&D. The NIH also offers fast track awards that combine phase 1 and phase 2 into a single award and a single application, as well as direct to phase 2 awards if you have developed an idea beyond the feasibility stage of your resources. For technologies that require more time and resources to develop, we also have a Phase 2B award that provides additional funding to support technologies moving into the commercialization phase development. And the Phase 2B is a continuation of a Phase 2 award. And participation in the Phase 2B program varies by institute. In addition, there's some other additional funding opportunities for awardees to help with the commercialization components. And as always, it's good to check with your program officials within each institute to learn more about what funding opportunities are available to you. And sorry, one more thing to mention. So the NIH has received budget waivers from the Small Business Administration to exceed the statutory budget limits that are published. And so waiver topics can be found at the website or by contacting program staff to understand budget flexibilities within each institute. So how do you apply? There are 3 types of funding opportunities at the NIH. The company-initiated applications come in through the omnibus solicitation with 3 application deadlines per year. These are January 5th, April 5th, and September 5th. There are NIH prioritized opportunities called targeted funding opportunities, and these are announced for very focused priority areas, and the application dates vary by each institute or each funding announcement. And then coming up soon, next month, there is the annual SBIR contract solicitation, which are very targeted solicitations with specified deliverables. And these are specific to each institute. And as I mentioned, this is coming out once a year. It comes out in the summertime with a fall deadline for the applications. You can find out more information about available funding opportunities at sbir.nih.gov. Another thing to keep in mind is that it usually takes about 9 months from the time you apply until you receive funding. The SBIR and STTR programs are very competitive. Success rates range from less than 10% to greater than 40% depending on the institute, the phase you're applying for, and the budgets. Talking to program staff prior to submitting increases your chances of success by helping you understand the process and priorities of NIH institutes. If you'd like to learn more, you can contact us through one of these different channels, either by email, find us on Twitter, or go to our website, sbir.nih.gov. All right, so now I'm gonna pass it over to Todd.
Hello all, thank you. And thank you, Mike. I'm excited to dive into the NIA, SBIR, and STTL programs and our seed funding for accelerating Alzheimer's and aging research. So I lead the NIA Office of Small Business Research. We were started just under 2 years ago and really have 6 major function areas. First, we centrally coordinate the program across the scientific divisions of the National Institute on Aging. We provide guidance to applicants, and I'll talk more about that as we go. Outreach, such as this panel today, and thank you to Life Science Nation for inviting us to present to all of you. Seeding specific funding areas, and I'll mention some of that today. Networking, really engaging with stakeholders and leveraging the other investments that stakeholders make so we can all work together synergistically to move innovations as far as we can and to get them commercialized and helping our communities. And then entrepreneurship. So we strategically fund innovations for Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, aging in place, age-related diseases, research tools, really anything that can enhance or expand healthy aging. And there are a variety of additional kind of interest areas that cut across each of these topics. And on the right, you can see a pie chart that just talks about the types of technologies that we're funding, the breakdown that typically occurs, and it varies a little bit from year to year, but about a third is therapeutics, and then there's a big focus on devices and digital health, diagnostics, research tools. We are part of many different funding opportunities, and you can find them all on our website. But as Mike mentioned, the omnibus funding opportunity is the primary funding opportunity at the NIH. For the omnibus at NIA, we allow up to $300,000 for phase 1 and up to $2 million for phase 2. For Alzheimer's disease and related dementia, we have a separate funding opportunity, PS-19-316 and 317. And for that funding opportunity, really it's open to anything that addresses Alzheimer's disease, whether it be digital health, prevention, therapeutics, diagnostics, etc. And for that funding opportunity, we can allow phase ones up to $500,000 and phase twos up to $2.5 million. We also participate in the commercialization readiness programs that was mentioned. We have administrative supplements for our currently funded companies that want to promote diversity in the companies and the projects and can provide additional funds for those. We participate in the NIH Tech Transfer SBIR FOA, as well as several others, and the link is here. We have other resources to help companies. So like NHLBI, we participate in the Applicant Assistance Program, which is a 10-week coaching program meant for people that have not been able to receive a NIH SBIR STTR award before and get coaching on their application. We allow companies to submit for technical assistance. I mentioned the diversity supplement. We participate in things like C3I and ICOR, which are entrepreneurial training programs at the NIH. And we leverage the resources from the SEED office, which is available across the NIH. As Mike mentioned, it's really critical that you come talk to us before you apply, so we could do our best to both demystify the process and provide you with specific guidance on your application and if it fits what the reviewers and us will be looking for. So I always recommend before you come talk to us, so we can provide that specific guidance, to send us a executive summary, and the version that I'm suggesting is the draft of the specific aims page, which is a key score driving page of the application. The first half of that page, you really want to focus on the elevator pitch. We get thousands of applications a year, so in that first half of page, why is this the one that we should want to fund the best out of those thousands of applications? And that can include things like the value proposition, the competitive advantage, textual highlights, or the data that you'll show elsewhere in the application. And then being able to crystallize, what are you actually going to do with the money? What are the proposed aims? Send that to us, at least a month before the deadline. We'll be able to provide guidance. Look forward to connecting with you, and thank you very much. Look forward to the rest of the panel.
Great. So thanks, Todd. Launching off your last slide of the elevator pitch, Steve, maybe you could take a few moments to talk. What are the most important components of an elevator pitch, and how you kind of help folks that are, once they're funded, to kind of develop their story about their company?
Sure. So we coach a lot of companies on how to do elevator pitches or quick pitches for investor conferences. There's usually about 8 or 9 slides that are key for these pitches. Usually what you want to do is define the problem that you're trying to solve, and then you present the solution, and those are usually done in a couple of slides. What we like to see is a little bit of data about why the solution works, and we know that as an investor, we know that you've done that kind of background work. We also like to see a slide devoted to intellectual property protection, because obviously investors want to invest in technologies that are protected, so that people don't come in and eat your lunch. We also are very interested in what the costs are that you're looking at to move forward to hit specific milestones. So usually there's a timeline slide that's important. And then, obviously one of the more important slides is to talk about the team and the advisors in the company. One of the things that investors are probably more focused on than anything else is the team. Why are you the best team to take this technology forward? And what is your experience? What sort of experiences have you had, bringing early technologies forward? What we know is that investors know that CEOs and executive teams that have done it before are much more likely to be successful than teams that have never done it before. And then usually there's a summary slide at the very end that it sort of summarizes in bullet form the key features of the presentation that you've made, and you leave that slide up on the screen during Q&A so that people in the audience can see what you remind themselves of what you said, and also your name and your title and contact information should be present as well. So those are sort of the main features of the pitches that that we like to see, Mike.
Thanks. And I guess, Louis, adding to that, tying back to the actual application and the commercialization component, which is, how you start to develop your story,
Yep.
maybe give some best practices and suggestions on kind of clarity you can provide in the both commercialization component of the application, but then how that then continues on to, help develop your pitch and your business story.
Yeah, the commercialization component of the application really needs to crystallize what's the problem you're trying to solve, and then have some realistic buildup of a market assumption, and recognizing that there are existing therapies. So if you don't characterize the standard of care and how you're changing that, you haven't really hit the mark on your commercialization component. Recognizing you may not have the in vivo and clinical data to understand where exactly in a treatment hierarchy you're going to be, but you need to address that. Too often you see applications where they give you a lot of physiology, but not a whole lot of, all right, and how's this going to work as a product in a competitive marketplace that isn't standing still.
Great. And I guess you're all in the same sequence. So Gautam, also part of that commercialization plan is IP, and even in phase 1, while it's not required to put it in there, it's still good to demonstrate to the reviewers that you have some IP strategy. So maybe you can give some kind of goalposts of what an IP strategy might look like, and some common mistakes that you see with some of our early stage companies, either in the application, but then also when you're working with them pre-company, even what they might think to consider.
Yeah, sure, Mike. So as Steve correctly pointed out, investors are not going to, or I shouldn't say not, but very unlikely to invest in companies that do not have some sort of barrier to entry. And most of the time, the barrier to entry is some form of intellectual property. So what's important is that if innovators realize is that intellectual property is not just patents. Most of us think it's patents, and for the most part, it is patents. But you need to understand, that there are different forms of intellectual property protection, and we think of normal patents, but there are also design patents. So if you have a device, that's you can get design patents. There are copyrights, there are trademarks, there are trade secrets, and what you should be thinking about is what is the technology that you have, and what are the different ways that it can be protected. So a lot of these ways of intellectual property protection are actually overlapping. So just because you have a trademark doesn't mean that you can't get a trade secret. They sound similar, but they're actually quite different. And just because you have a design patent doesn't mean that you can't get a utility patent on the same different aspects of the same invention. So what I would say is, as Mike correctly pointed out, while it's not required to have intellectual property protections, you really should. And what's important is to think about what you're trying to protect, what you're trying to commercialize, and do the intellectual property protections that you have match what you're trying to commercialize. So if you're trying to commercialize a device, but your patents are on the method of using the device, there's a disconnection there. So it's important to be able to make sure that what you're covering is protecting is what you're trying to commercialize. Also, I think, and Steve may talk a little bit more about this, a lot of innovators, and this is a question of cost, go for the US only. They don't file international patent applications. And if you're missing out on international rights, it's a big problem. And I'll have Steve talk more about how that affects your investability. But these are the two things I'd point out. So think about what you're trying to protect, how you'd like to protect it, and are you getting the intellectual property rights from other countries as well?
Maybe just one follow-up question. We see this with reviewers sometimes who maybe don't understand IP protection per se, but so maybe you can just clarify what applicants or just folks can educate people, trade secret versus IP versus a patent, and why it might be appropriate just to have those trade secrets compared to not going for a patent.
Okay, so the best example I can think of, there are two really good examples why you'd want to have something called a trade secret. And a trade secret, think Coca-Cola, formula Coca-Cola, easiest way to think about a trade secret. So there are certain things that are difficult to patent, like algorithms and even their uses. So you may want to protect that as a secret. And the other things that you could patent, for example, a formulation, that you may decide to protect as a secret rather than expose it to the world. So you've got, so oftentimes a patent which requires disclosure is antithetical to a trade secret that requires it to be kept a secret. So it's, they both can be done for different aspects, but what you'd like to think about is what I have easily reverse engineerable? If the answer is no, and you'd like to keep it as a secret rather than disclosing it to the world, then it's better to keep it as a trade secret versus a disclosure as a patent application. So that's one way. So formulations are one, as I said. Algorithms are typically another one. Software is always difficult to, is getting difficult to patent. The patent landscape seems to be constantly changing. So you could copyright that, for example, or keep that as a trade secret as well. So these are sort of things to think about. And when we talk about an IP strategy, as Mike correctly pointed out, these are the kinds of things that go into your IP strategies. It doesn't mean, just sit down and say, oh, I have an IP strategy. It is what you're trying to protect, why you're trying to protect it, and how you're trying to protect it. So that's what goes into what is considered an IP strategy.
Great, thanks. So we've talked a little bit about kind of what to include in your commercialization plan and maybe, how to pitch to investors. Todd, from your perspective as a former program officer and now the director of the aging component, maybe you can go over some best practices or best tips for applying and developing that effective grant application.
Yeah, so I think that starts to get to a point of delineating, an investor from the NIH. And there are a lot of similarities and there are some differences too. So when we invest in companies, we do it in the form of non-dilutive funding, as was mentioned. And we tend to focus, I would say, a little more on the award at hand than the overall company and the investability of the overall company. And that creates some differences. So Steve mentioned the importance of the team. And I think when investors look at the team, they're really thinking about the importance of the team in terms of this someone that can really commercialize the product, as he mentioned. Whereas for SBIR, we're focused more on the team for that specific project. And, do you have the right individuals for that specific project? What a lot of people forget is some of the complementary expertise. So they might, have the right PI leading the project, but they might have a lot of statistics in there and not include a consultant that can do some of the biostatistics. Thinking about the different pieces that go into your project and making sure that you can cover them in the award. I'd say that's probably one of the two things that get commented the most and affect scores the most in a negative way. The other would be the approach section. And the NIH really focuses on what are you going to do in this specific award. And that includes justifying the types of models you're using. So if you're selecting a specific mouse model, why that model? Is that model clinically predictive? How? So really thinking about, you really have to spend a lot of real estate in your application on justifying all the elements of the approach and showing that they are the necessary and the appropriate next steps in development. So, sometimes we'll see an approach that sounds great, but there's a big question that you haven't answered yet before you go to those steps. So we'll really dig into that, and the reviewers will dig into that.
Thanks. And just as a reminder, we said it during the slides, but the best place to go for those critique or advice for the approach is the NIH. And so contacting the SBIR offices at your different institute is the best way to get to the program officer who is the, institute expert in your field and can help you with those aims and adjust your endpoints. I guess broadening out a little bit to kind of the approach we use for educating our innovators. Steve and Lewis, why don't you just go through a little bit about how we do our product development support services and how that's expanding across the NIH and where innovators can look for different support services at the NIH.
Lewis.
Sure, yeah, I'll start. So 6 of the companies attending this Resi were coached by us to have, so they make that, as they're making that transition from being NIH funded to investor funded for their pitches. And a big part of what we do is help companies graduate from federal funding because SBIR and STTRs are a terrific way of funding, as Todd said, programs or studies, but they don't fund all aspects of company building. You need a commercial infrastructure, a regulatory infrastructure, and there's some things you need other kinds of money to fund. And so the scientific entrepreneur needs to get facile at doing that. And we at NIH have a strong incentive, given that our objective is seeing these inventions see the light of day and become a tool in the clinical arsenal. We want them to succeed. And so we provide conference support for events like this. We also have a network of mentors that I manage, about 70 individuals who volunteer their time to give you advice over the phone. They're located nationally as our awardees. So even pre-COVID, it was always a virtual offering to tap in expertise for a couple hours of their time to help you with anything from marketing, IP, regulatory, reimbursement, manufacturing and QC, any one of the, not only research questions, but non-research questions to at least get you started down a path and to point you in a direction of where do you find additional expertise to help out the more expansive company building enterprise that eventually is needed in addition to the research enterprise that NIH is funding quite directly.
And maybe, Mike, I can just add sort of a little bit of color around the investing side. When companies come to meetings like RESI, they need to really understand clearly what it is they're looking for. So for example, we see companies that are looking for a CEO, or they might be looking for a partner who has marketing expertise in their sector, related to their technology. Most of the time, companies are at conferences like RESI looking for money. And so let me focus on the strategic partner group and the capital providers. If you're looking for a strategic partner, let's say you have a drug candidate that you know that you're going to need to partner off with a large company like Pfizer or J&J. And I'm going to go back to one of the things that Gautam mentioned. You've got to be very careful about your IP, because I can guarantee you that if you want to partner with a company like J&J or Pfizer or Merck, they're going to want worldwide rights to your compound. And so if you've already, if you've not pursued patent coverage in the EU, in Japan, in China, you're going to have trouble getting a company like that to sort of partner with you. So you just have to keep that in mind. And you can, a lot of companies can make very, very terrible decisions very early on in the formation of the company without really understanding what they're doing. And then they come up years later to these issues where they are unable to fulfill their needs because they haven't made the right decision. So that's one of the things about partnering. In terms of capital providers, you have to think about, there's basically three ways that you can raise capital. One is the strategic partner that I mentioned. If they're really interested in what you're doing, they will also frequently put money into your company, either as a corporation on their own, or they might have a sidecar fund that they work with. Most of the time, the capital providers that you're going to be dealing with at a conference like RESI are angel capital investors or venture capital investors. And so you really need to understand what those two sectors are looking for in terms of investment opportunities. If you think that your company has a valuation today before investment of something like $5 million or more, you're probably going to have to talk to venture investors. If you think that you can live with a valuation that's below $5 million, then you're sort of in the world of angel capital investors. Angel investors like to invest in companies that have $3 to $5 million pre-money value, and they're interested in putting up something on the order of several $100,000 to maybe upwards to $1 million. That's generally what an angel investment looks like. Venture capital firms and you got to realize there's different size of venture firms, but generally speaking, they will probably not bother with you if your valuation is below 10 million, 5 to 10 million, and they want to be able to put in, a number of millions of dollars into the company. So you've got to really think a little bit about the valuation situation. And if your valuation, if you think, okay, well, I'm going to say my valuation is 10 million and I'm going to go to the venture folks, you've got to be able to justify that $10 million valuation. So let me just say a couple of words about valuation determination. This is a very complicated area. As angel investors, we start with understanding how much actual cash has been invested in the company. And that's not NIH money, it's actual private money, friends and family, maybe some early seed stage money and so forth. So that's usually the foundation for valuation. And then if you have an issued patent, that adds significant value to the company. Some say that an issued US patent is worth $1 million. If you've taken that to international phase, then it's more value, obviously higher value. And then a lot of entrepreneurs think, well, look, I've worked on this technology for 7 years, and there's a lot of sweat equity. That doesn't count for valuation, because the company that the investors are looking at today is based on everything that's gone into it, and the actual valuation is based on real cash input and largely intellectual property as well. So those are some things to think about. I mean, we can go into a lot more detail about this, but I think, Mike, I'll leave it there for the moment.
Great, thank you both. I guess, Todd, turning it back to the NIH focus, why would investors want to invest in NIH-funded companies?
Great question. I think there's a lot of reasons. One is obviously the non-dilutive nature. So it definitely helps the cap table at the end of the day when a lot of the funding has been non-dilutive in nature, which means no repayment, no equity, no royalties, nothing of that sort. So that definitely helps. I think another part is obviously the validation that comes from the NIH peer review process and the different selection processes we go through to make awards. They are competitive programs, and I think they show up in the quality of our portfolio. And not just investing in our companies, but really, I encourage investors to contact us as well and, really think strategically. So the NIA is an example right now. Our estimate for this year is about $115 million, a little higher. That is going to the small business funding programs. And we're thinking about it in a very strategic way. So one, we will potentially, in Alzheimer's disease, an example, go in a little bit earlier, take some more risk where risk is needed in terms of targets, but then also potentially fund later and partner with our other NIA research programs to fund through clinical development if necessary in some areas. So, and we can leverage different programs. So for example, there is the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation, ADDF, actually has a program that that they started this year, that if you're funded by the NIH with a phase 1 SBIR, you can then talk to them about potentially getting bridge funding at the end of your phase 1 to provide capital while you're applying and waiting for phase 2 SBIR. So that it'll really lengthen your runway, providing that you're in their mission space too, because for them, it's much better for not just their capital going in, but then they benefit from the NIH capital going in as well. So, we're always happy to talk and figure out how we can all be working together to strategically push these innovations across the finish line.
Great, thank you. I think with that, I'll ask for any closing remarks from Gautam, Steve, or Louis regarding any last pieces of advice for either investors pitching or applying to the NIH.
So I'll start with the patent pieces to follow up on what Steve said. Just understand the terminology matters. And a lot of people I know are not clear as to the difference between a patent and a patent application, a provisional application. So I would encourage you all to educate yourselves on what you have, what you plan to get, and how you talk about what you have. So as Steve pointed out, if an issued US patent is worth something to an investor, make sure you have one. And if you have one, say that you have an issued US patent. If you don't have one, it's okay to say that you have an application pending. That's quite all right. But just understand that the terminology does matter, and it's important to use the right terminology for the right kinds of things. So I would say to all of you, find out what you have and describe it accurately, because that'll help you in the long run.
For investors, I would advise take a good hard look at the NIH companies. As Todd noted, there's been a significant selection process to get this funded. Given the time horizons and the fact that it's only usable for research, by definition, these companies have got themselves going in other ways as well. So they're very amenable, but in almost all cases, they need expertise in commercialization, which is where you come in. So it's a terrific opportunity.
And let me just reemphasize a couple of points. NIH funding for small companies is as Todd said, it's a validation, and it's viewed very positively by investors, certainly by angel investors in venture. I will say that it's not required to get private capital funding, but it's a big help. So we recommend that companies look carefully at the NIH, SBIR, STTR programs. It's a great way to bring in capital to move you along the development pathway as a company without giving away equity. It's non-dilutive capital. And if you have NIH funding, you can achieve some of your early milestones that create valuation inflection points that then allow you to ask for a greater valuation at a later time when you actually do go to private capital.
Great, thank you. And I'll just add that even if you apply to the NIH and you don't receive funding, you still receive really great feedback from your peers on ways to pivot or improve your application or identify areas that you may not have thought about, either in the technology development component or just how to commercialize your technology. With that, I'll say thank you to our panelists for participating this wonderful afternoon. And if you want to learn more about the SBIR program, again, it's sbir.nih.gov. And you can look us up on the partnering app as well. Thank you.